Last week I published a video about how to build your new plastic infantry for bolt action. However, when new players ask, how do I build my new plastic infantry, there might actually be two questions being asked. The first of those that I answered last week was, how do I build the infantry into squads? How many of each weapon, rifle and submachine gun, how many veterans, lieutenants, spotters, how to organise building those models, that sort of thing. The other question that how do I build my new plastic infantry can mean is, how do I physically build the models? How do I assemble from this sheet of little bits into some playable models for a game? I also mentioned that I will be building some Japanese models soon, and here they are. So hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and let's have a look at how to build plastic models in a format directly aimed at beginners. Welcome to the hobby, or welcome to the death of your wallet. Other than your plastic model kit that you of course need, you will want two other things. The first is a sharp thing to separate parts, commonly called a hobby knife. The other is for joining those parts together, and polystyrene cement is the best, but there are other options. When it comes to the separating tools, you can use some sharp hobby snips, but you don't need them. Wire cutters aren't really useful for this, they're a bit too chunky. Really, the craft knife is all you need to get started. And remember that mold line removers are a scam. For attaching the pieces together, polystyrene cement, commonly misnamed as plastic glue these days, is a safe to use solvent that melts and fuses the parts together very strongly. If all you have is superglue, that's perfectly fine and that will work. Of course, if you're using metal or resin components, you will need to use superglue, but for the majority of kits, they will be plastic and poly cement will be perfect, but superglue will work. Both superglue and polystyrene cement come in thick and thin versions. I personally prefer thick, but many people prefer thin. Really, it's not that big a deal and it comes down to personal preference. Superglue and craft knives can often be found in Poundland or similar cheap stuff shops, or in common hardware shops. Poly cement is usually only in model or craft shops, but is pretty cheap, and if you've managed to find a plastic model kit, poly cement will usually be nearby. To get started, you probably don't need to wash a modern plastic sprue. Unless you've got something from the 90s or before, we can just get straight to snipping bits off the sprue. Your plastic kit will often come with some instructions that will show which bits go with which other bits, so do follow that. I'm building some Japanese for bolt action, and they're all really simple in terms of which bit goes where. To show an example, I'm going to be building my officer first, and whenever you're looking at building a new model, you work out which bits you want to use based on the instructions or based on how you want the model to look, and you cut them from the sprue. Now leave a little bit of the sprue on the pieces for the moment. Whilst we clean up the mold line, we can clean those up as well without leaving a big gouged hole in the model. The mold line is where the two pieces of the mold that made the parts join and a tiny bump of plastic sticks out. We'll remove this by gently scraping the back of our knife against it. And this is why mold line removers are a scam. They are a stamped sheet metal with unfinished edges. A craft knife is a stamped sheet metal piece with one edge sharpened and the others unfinished. So you already own mechanically identical objects if you have a craft knife. Mold line removers are a scam. When you scrape off a mold line, rotate the model a little bit back and forth as you do it so you get a rounded surface. If you scrape the same direction every time, you can end up with a flat spot, and that might be noticeable at the end. As I mentioned, I will be building my lieutenant for the Japanese, or a Rikugun Shoi, I believe is the correct term, although I have to look up the pronunciation for that. Naturally, a Japanese officer of World War II would not be complete without a sword. I put the pieces together without any cement first, so I know how they work and what angle I want it at and how it's going to look. I then put a little bit of poly cement on the joining surface and press the pieces together. Notice that I give it a little wiggle and then press the pieces together slightly. That is to make the melting plastic mush together, and so as it sets, it will be a strong join. Usually with poly cement you can let go after a few seconds, although if used a lot it might droop slightly over the first minute or so, and so do check in on it before too long. Now I want to also have my officer carrying a rifle in addition to the sword, and so I found an empty generic carrying stuff arm and a loose rifle. For this type of thing, I usually find it best to glue the rifle to the hand first and then the arm to the body, rather than the other way around. But test fit the pieces and you might think that the other way around works best for you. Again, a little bit of poly cement, push the pieces together, a little wiggle and a gentle pressure to smush the plastic, and it should hold. Then I put the arm onto the body in exactly the same process and we are well on the way. In fact, I just have to find an appropriate head, one with a cap for me, and a yelling face, and we follow the same steps. Cleaning off the mould lines can be quite difficult for a very small part like this, so just take your time and be careful with it. Test fit the head onto the model, a little bit of cement, a little wiggle, and a press, and my officer is done. Now, given that he has a sword in one hand, he currently doesn't have anywhere to put it. On the sprue is a sword in a scabbard, and so I'm going to show you a very easy modification, and this is usually called a conversion. I will come down to my cutting mat and cut directly into the mat through the handle of the sword to remove the handle from the scabbard. I put my fingers over the parts to prevent them from pinging across the room, but be careful not to cut directly towards your finger when doing this. Now I can stick the scabbard to my officer, and annoyingly it doesn't quite fit onto the rifle that I put there, but if I have it flicking out it adds to the running effect of the model, as I chose the running legs. Speaking of legs, we need a base for them to stand on. In Warlord's case these come on a little sprue, so we can cut them away, scrape down the mould line and sprue gates, and then the same sticking process as we've done several times to put the model onto the base. Now, depending on how you want to do basing, you might want to put basing material on before the model, or even paint it before putting the model on, but I will stick the model to the base as the basing I will be using is going to work fine this way. Now, you might wonder why I put the model on its base last rather than first. Doing that first would make it easier to hold the model, right? Well, yes, it absolutely would, that is correct, and if you want to do it that way, that actually makes a lot of sense. However, I often find that I end up with weird hanging out bits like bayonets and swords and spears and so on, and so I prefer to build the model and then I can place it on the base in a way that looks appropriate. Although it's often very easy to separate a model from its base and adjust its position, it's not that difficult. Now that my officer is complete, I can have a look at some other models and how some different pieces go together. I will build a light machine gun as an example of a prone model with a separate hand and bipod. I'll stick the bipod and hand to the gun first, and then all of that will go onto the body. Whilst it's still wet, I hold the model against the base, and I just adjust the weapon so that it lines up with the ground. This doesn't have to be perfect, as we're going to be putting basing material on at some point later on, and so if there's a little bit of a gap or the body is raised, we can deal with that with the basing. And you don't have to rush with this. You have several minutes that you can adjust the position, and even after about 10 minutes you can pull pieces off, add more poly cement and stick them down again. Just relax and try to line things up how you want them. Even though my sword conversion earlier was not an intended way to build the kit, sometimes it is intended or even required to cut certain pieces. As an example, in the Japanese kit there is a hand holding a mortar bomb that is a separate piece from an arm, and so I need to find an appropriate right arm and remove its hand. Now this is nice and easy in this example, as we'll cut along the end of the cuff of the sleeve, and again cutting directly into my cutting mat so I don't slice my fingernails off. If you don't own a cutting mat, that's absolutely fine. Use a scrap of wood or some other material that you don't mind getting scratched and cut up. Just don't ruin your nice dining table. In this case, I thought it was easier to glue the arm to the body and then the mortar bomb hand to the arm to make the loader for my mortar. Now, with conversions, you can go to extremes if you really want to. And as an example of that, I'm not a fan of these legs. So I found another with the same boot design, and I will slice these 2 pieces into 6 and then glue them all back together again. Cutting on the edge of a feature of the model, such as a belt, makes it very easy to hide the join when gluing the pieces back together. And I'll cut both of the bodies in the same place. Separating the legs in this case, the open shirt at the front makes it very easy to hide the join, but at the back it will be a little harder to hide. I did scrape away a little of the chewed up plastic so that the parts would join on a flat surface, but this doesn't need to be perfect. I stuck the legs together in the opposing pairing to their original pieces, and then the torsos stuck to the top. This extra bit of work took me less than 10 minutes, and nobody will notice it. You really don't need to be doing this kind of conversion, but I wanted to point it out as a possibility because it might give you some interesting ideas. Now, the obvious join at the back is going to need something to hide it. Now, we can use a modelling putty like Milliput or Green Stuff. We could use sprue glue to just flood the gap, or we can actually stick a bit of plastic shavings in with poly cement, and once it sets, we can shave it down as if it was just a big mould line. But in this case, it's actually really easy to be super lazy and just glue some pouches over the join. What you will probably find when building your first 30 models or so is that 20 or so of them will be riflemen. So you better get used to building those. For the Japanese sprues, this has been made super easy, and it's only 3 parts. Most of the sets of rifle arms have both arms and rifle moulded as one piece. So a little poly cement on both of the shoulder joins, a little wiggle and press, and it's most of the way built. Hold up the model to make sure it's at the angle you want, and then we stick on a head, wiggle and press that, point it how you want, and we are all done. Nice and easy. Some kits, and one example in this kit, have one arm separate. I often find it easiest to stick the right arm on first, make sure that lines up how I want it to, and then leave it for a minute to become firm. I then stick on the left arm and line up the wrist and the shoulder, and if it doesn't quite line up, the right arm should still be soft enough to adjust it slightly, but it won't be so loose as it's just moving around, making it annoying to hold everything together. And then build another, and some more. And if you're fancy, stick some more pouches on. Some pouches have specific uses. The mortar pouches for the mortar loaders, for example. The map pouch would look good on an officer, that sort of thing. But you don't necessarily have to worry about those specifics, as you can be sure that soldiers used whatever pouches they could get their hands on to carry around whatever else they got their hands on to put in said pouches. So I think at this point you have enough information to build up your first kit. And so I can show you how I organised mine, and this is based on my comments on last week's video. As I went on about a little too long, here is a 10 model rifle squad with a light machine gun team and an NCO with a submachine gun. A quick mention of modifying bits for this specific kit: the submachine gun magazine has to be snipped slightly to fit in the gun, as it's been modelled to show it reloading, which is actually really cool. I also cut a light machine gun magazine off of an unused gun to give that to the loader for the light machine gun. Just stuck it in. As the Japanese have the option for a grenadier squad, who can take multiple light mortars, I made 2 teams with light mortars, and then there is a 5th model to be an NCO with a rifle. I also made a few of the HQ options that I talked about last week. Here is a pistol and sword model who will be my Kempotai, a model with rifle and binoculars who can be a spotter or just a rifleman. There is a trumpet and rifle combo to be an assistant to an officer, or again just a rifleman. Here's the officer that I showed earlier, we've done that one already, and a flag bearer, as that's one of the options of the kit. Then, lastly, a lunge mine. A quick mention is that you do have to snip the end off of the flagpole to make room for the bomb of the lunge mine, but you might notice that this is only 21 models and not the full 30. And that's because I swapped some parts for this box second hand rather than buying it new, and I'm sure I'm going to get more Japanese models eventually, so that's not even an issue. However, hypothetically, if I were to imagine that I had 30 models exactly, as if I had bought this box new, I would make them like this. That rifle squad would be exactly as it is. I would pad out the grenadier squad with 5 more rifle models. Now I don't think I'd make a third light mortar until I got a second box, as 2 light mortars is probably enough for 30 models. I'd also make a second bomb stick. Again, you can have 3, but I'd stick with 2 until I got the next box of models. For the last remaining 3 models, I would be torn between just 3 more rifles, which is always really useful, or a couple of submachine guns. One can be an NCO for the Grenadier squad, or they can be assistants to my officer or Kempertai if I didn't want to run those with rifles. I think I might like to have 3 submachine guns in total. So to add to what I have currently to make it exactly 30 models, it would be 2 more submachine guns, 1 more lunge mine, and 6 more rifles. I hope that gives you newbies all of the information and confidence that you need to get stuck into building your new toy soldiers. Let me know in the comments below if you have any more questions. There is a whole host of thousands and thousands of things that you could possibly consider, but I'm pretty sure what I've outlined here will be enough to get a new player started building their models without all of the extraneous extra bits that you just don't need to worry about when getting started. For now, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.